And I don't recognize that person at all. So I am absolutely delighted to be here. I was about to say, actually, that I agree with absolutely everything Ayaan said, so I was tempted to just sit down and say ditto. But I've traveled 4,000 miles to be here, so I don't think that's going to work. And again, I want to comment, really. Ayaan's got more bravery and courage in her little finger than I have in the whole of my body. I've had death threats myself, but they tend to come from my own children. In fact, 2 of them are with me today in New York. I asked them if they wanted to come and hear me speak, and they said, I hear you speak all the time, why would I want to? And there's nothing better than children in keeping you grounded, and you can probably imagine they have done so every single day of my life. Absolutely delighted to be here. Can I say thank you very much to Ayaan, to Amanda, to Manon, there she is, Manon, Julie, Chris, Ed, the AHA Foundation, and everybody else that's in this room, because you are champions and you're leaders in this field just by being here today. The NYPD officers at the back, as always. Every conference I've spoken at, anywhere in the world, the police always at the back. Presumably because they think a quick exit is needed at some point, run for your life. But anyway, I'm absolutely delighted that they are here and able to join in with us, because just by your presence, you've demonstrated your commitment to this area of concern. And as I think it's been said already, everywhere you look, you will find this issue. So don't pretend that it doesn't happen in your district or in your city or in your part of the world. It does, and it needs people like you, quite frankly, to champion it and to work on the solutions, which I think somebody mentioned a few minutes ago. What are the solutions? And we'll touch on them as we move during the next few minutes or so. And I didn't mention you, Jürgen, did I? I've met so many fantastic people when I was here last year, with people with real commitment to this area. And one of the things I was touched by was their desire and need to learn more. And I think that's pivotal, really. The more we learn from each other, the more we learn from around the country, around the world, the better we become at the job that we do. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, which is that an English phrase or American phrase? I don't know. But we've done it. We've made the mistakes before. Don't make the same mistakes. Let's learn from each other's mistakes and let's move forward. And I think that's where we start and where we stand. Now, CPS means something very different in this country, I understand. And I am, as you just heard, head of the Crown Prosecution Service in England. And I have 100,000 prosecutions a year responsibility for, and that's everything from road traffic violations to homicides, etc., etc. I'm a 22-year prosecutor. Doesn't look it. I don't look it. You're absolutely right. But you know, I've been a prosecutor for a very long time, and I've had the opportunity, literally the opportunity, to learn from people like you, because I didn't know anything. I still don't know anything. I'm picking it up as I go along, as you probably imagine. Where are we? Well, again, it has to be said that we need to park our prejudices at the door. So whatever Western prejudices we have, whatever assumptions we've made, whatever we believe, we need to park that at the door, because as Ayaan said, the victim is always right. Whether you like it or not, if she believes, and invariably it is she, if she believes that something is likely to flare up or has flared up, if you do not believe her or don't act upon that belief, then the risk to her is extraordinary. And I think, you know, Ayaan mentioned it might be 2 years, 5 years. Let me tell you, it can be 2 hours or 5 hours. The escalation of risk for that particular individual can be as fast as you can breathe. And I can point to a couple of examples, which I will do during the course of the next few minutes. Now, my involvement stems from this conference I organised 10 years ago in the United Kingdom. At that time, we were pretty much where you are, I think. There was a sense of a lack of understanding, a lack of appreciation. It was hiding. It wasn't really being addressed in the ways that it is being now. And we've had to make mistakes along the way in order for us to get to where we are today. And where we are today, I'm pleased to be able to tell you, is I think we lead the world. And it's very rare for Britain to say that we lead the world on it. Yes, we had a very good Olympics, by the way. But the point is, you know, very little for us. There's very little that we can say now in the 21st century where we actually do lead the world. And I think this is an area where we do. And that's in part because we've learned. And we've learned that you need to believe victims. We've learned that you need the tools to do the job. We've learned that you as champions, you need more champions. You need to have a real passion for this work. If you don't have that passion, then regrettably people will suffer, and you need to be persistent. And there will be other traps along the way, and I will touch upon them in the next half hour or so. But let me, very, very recently, I dealt with, there was another successful prosecution, which again, pretty much everything we deal with is high profile. High profile because, as Ayan said, these can be staggeringly brutal killings. Shafila Ahmed, which is the most recent case, a successful prosecution just over a month ago, she went missing 9 years ago, and we found her body 5 or 6 months later, but the point is that she was murdered by her father in the presence of 3 other siblings, and then her body was taken and thrown away in a rural part of England. And it took us 9 years to break that wall of silence. You can imagine what the young children must have felt, and the trauma that they must have been going through, which prevented them from talking about this. Eventually, one of them had the courage to do so, and eventually we were able to bring a successful prosecution of the father and the mother. But the point I'm making is that the brutality of these types of crimes is, again, as Ayan said, about the messaging. The message here is if you don't behave, this will happen to you. Time and time again, we come across this kind of narrative that the victim isn't just the victim of that family or of that community. The victim will be anybody, and you need to learn from this experience or else. And that kind of messaging is something that we've had to deal with over the last decade or so. Now, again, we've already touched on the definitions. What we are talking about here is crimes in the name of the Father, the Son, and the blessed male members of the family. We're talking about the Holy Trinity, men making the rules, women having to obey them, women being brought up from day one into thinking that men are the answer when men aren't even one of the questions. And the belief is that somehow or other you have to behave in a certain way. Isn't it odd, isn't it, that only women carry the honor of the family? What is it about men? I remember I came across a man a few years ago. He told me, Nazir, don't you understand? My son has gone to prison for dealing in crack. He's got 6 years in prison. And my daughter, she wants to marry someone of her own choice. How dishonorable is she? Do you get the picture? Whatever men do, whenever they do it, well, quite frankly, they can just do it because they're men. Whereas women and young girls and young women, they have to behave in a certain way, and there are massive consequences. There are no opportunities for them, there are consequences in so many of these families and so many of these communities. And one of the statements I generally make is that there are thousands of women in the United Kingdom at risk every day of being harmed by people who claim to love them the most. Their own families and their own communities. That's in the United Kingdom. Now, I know for a fact that we've learned through various surveys and from registering cases that we have something like 8,000 to 10,000 forced marriages a year in the United Kingdom. Now, I think Tahiri said there were something like 3,000 a year in the United States. The point I'm making is that if we're 1/6 of your size, have 8,000 to 10,000 that we know about, what's the picture here? And I think that's part of the issue. It's about cataloguing, it's about research, it's about believing, it's about acknowledging and acting upon the information that you have. But you need to know the extent, because if you don't know the extent, you don't know what resources to put in to deal with it. We've been talking, I'm really pleased to see your State Department colleagues here. I was going to say my State Department, they're not my State Department. Because they've been absolutely active in this field. We had a video conference where I wasn't on video because my video collapsed, but I was still talking to you over the phone, and I was really pleased that they want to work in this field with you. I made it very clear to them, I said to them, and I'll say to you today, that NGOs are it as far as this area of criminality is concerned. You, those who work in the voluntary sector, those who rely upon volunteers, you are the answer to this. And you need to be supported by the statutory sector, by the police, by prosecutors and judges and all the rest of it. But you, as voluntary sectors, are the answer. And I'm really absolutely thrilled the AHA Foundation is leading in this way and in this field, because, quite frankly, it does need leaders. You can't wait for it to happen to you. You've got to take that action yourself. And when I talk about the issues of power and control, you've got to reflect upon why it is these young girls are brought up in the way they're brought up. They're brought up to think there is nothing else, that again, people have this image of what a forced marriage is, that somehow you drag her to the altar, and you make her say these words. No, if the emotional blackmail is there, if the psychological pressure is there, then she feels that she has no choice. You could have deception, where you're shown a picture of your groom who looks like Tom Cruise, and you end up marrying somebody who looks like me. Don't laugh, it's not. Anyway, the point is that you have forced marriage in so many forms. And I'm really pleased that Ayan mentioned the heart attack thing. Very common occurrence when the young girl runs away, and by the way, your mum's just had a heart attack, and then she comes back. Forced marriage is one of the best cures for heart disease I've ever known. And they will use every trick. And of course, why don't they? Why do they? Because as a parent, you know what buttons to press with your child. You know that if I press that button, she'll come back or she'll do this. That's what parents do. And that's what we have to respond to. So you've got to recognize that. And I'm really pleased, again, you mentioned mediation, the lack of... Parents will say absolutely everything to get their child back. And once she's back in her clutches, or their clutches, well, rest assured, you've done her a total disservice. So mediation is a complete no-no as far as I'm concerned, and certainly experience bears that out. Then we've talked about so many different forms. We've been trying to identify more and more types of victim. I think that's a good start, really. I mentioned, the vast majority of the cases that we deal with in the United Kingdom come from the South Asian community, not exclusively from the Muslim community, about 2/3 from the Muslim community, but we have Sikh victims, Hindu victims. We've had very recently a Jewish victim. We've had several Catholic victims from the Irish community in the United Kingdom, and one in Brazil, actually. So it's not the faith, it's the believer, for want of a better term, who thinks somehow or other this is the way he should act or she should act. And I think it was also said a moment ago about the women and the role of women here. Women will also be perpetrators. In Shafilia's case, mum and dad were in it together. And the pressure comes from without the community, it can come within the family. But the reality is that women can be party to the crime in the same way that men can. And you've also got to look for other victims. Just because you found this young girl who's a victim, what about the other sisters? What about her cousins and nieces? What risk are they at? Again, you've got to ask those questions, otherwise you're leaving people exposed to serious harm. And we've learned about suicide and self-harm, and those of you who work in, what is it, ER? We call it A&E. In ER, will recognize people coming in who are self-harming and the like. Why? Why are they self-harming? Why do they kill themselves? Our suicide rates, we have a domestic violence murder rate in the United Kingdom of 2 a week. So 2 women a week are killed, which probably mirrors New York probably, but 2 in the whole of the country. But suicide rates are 5 times that. And South Asian women are 3 times as likely to kill themselves as any other group in our society. 3 times as likely. In fact, there is one other group, and that's soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. So these women are in a war zone of their own, in their own little homes, where they feel there's nowhere for them to go, nothing else for them to do. The only way to take is to take what they would see as the easy way out, but it's not the easy way out, to kill themselves or to harm themselves. And we have a spate of cases over the last few years where these young women will jump in front of a train with their children in their arms, take their children with them. I think it also needs to be said that the issue, forced marriage is seen as such an exotic phenomenon. The forced marriage is actually the beginning of someone suffering. So even those who've been forced into marriage are people that should be on your radar. Forced marriage is like the earthquake, followed by a tsunami of domestic abuse, of child protection issues, of sexual assaults, of suicide, homicide, assaults, you name it. That follows on from the actual fact that a forced marriage has taken place. So don't end your job at the fact that you somehow prevented a forced marriage. There is more to come, unfortunately, and the more that you need to do. So we recognize that that's the nature of it. And of course, killings are always the most high profile. In our country, we have about 12 honor-based killings every year. Now, again, we're 1/6 of your size. So I have no idea what that would be here. And again, that's the kind of research that you need to do. And part of that is what we did is we went backwards. We looked at more than 100 homicides over the last decade and looked at various signal factors and thought, actually, this was honor-based. We didn't know it was honor-based at the time. We just dealt with it as a homicide, but actually it was honor-based. And we found that actually that was that mirrored what I just said a moment ago, 10 to a dozen a year. But murder is just the tip of the iceberg. You have, as you know, you have abductions and false imprisonments, and you have assaults, and you have sexual assaults, and you name it, you have a wide variety of behaviors. And you have women who are simply trapped and kept in their homes for all of their lives, never allowed to venture out, because if they did, that in itself would be dishonorable. And you have to make sure that you were able to somehow reach these people. There's a term we use in England, hard to reach. Nobody's hard to reach if you actually go out there and try and reach. So don't blame them. It's our responsibility to get out there and get the messages out to them. So when we talk about murder, again, when I talk about underestimating, we underestimate murder as well, because we have, and I'm glad to see again the State Department, we've had this conversation, there will be a sizable number of people who are exported for murder. So we can't kill them here in New York. We can't kill them in the United States of America because we'll get caught. But what we will do is we will take her to our homeland, for want of a better term, and that's where we'll do the dirty deed. And then you have to ask yourself, how many are happening here? How many young women are taken abroad and then simply murdered there or harmed there, or worse? There are many other things worse than that. You're living a life as a slave in a particular place or a particular home. To my mind, you've got to be mindful of the fact that women will be taken abroad, and we have a massive spike in our summer vacation time. I myself, I'm a born son of an immigrant, as I'm sure you love hearing. I'm a son of an immigrant who arrived in the United Kingdom the year before I was born. But I know that I was taken back to Pakistan for a few months to show me my heritage. I loved it. I learned so much about it. That was a long, long time ago. There's nothing wrong with people understanding where they came from. What we're not talking about, that is not what's happening in many of these cases. In many of these cases, they're taken back and then they become indoctrinated, or they become threatened, or they are harmed. And so you've got to recognize that there's something that we need to do to prevent that from happening. And part of the answer is the State Department response. A large part of the answer is you and your response to those particular individuals and what you may do or may not do in those cases. So exporting for murder, a big issue for us. Disability, where, I saw a toilet here called a handicapped toilet. I didn't know you still called it handicapped. Well, disability is a major issue for us. If you need a carer for your child, what better thing to do than to force them into marrying somebody? Because you get a carer. And you get a carer from another country. Ayan's point about immigration. I dealt with a case 5 years ago now of a woman, she must have been 23, 24, and she was on her 4th forced marriage. And every single time money was paid over to bring somebody into the country. $10,000 apiece. So she was literally the cash cow of the family. And she suffered from significant learning difficulties. So she didn't even know what was going on. So what do you do about that person? She's not going to come forward, but somebody will. Somebody will know what's going on. And it's about using whatever intelligence and information sources you have in getting that information in relation to that person. And then, of course, LGBT issues. Do you use the same phrase here? Lesbian. The moment you come out to your parents, I'm gay, Dad, you're getting married tomorrow. That's a very common occurrence. So you've got to recognize that that's another trigger sometimes for this kinds of issue. The last thing we want is for us to lose face with the community. And a large part of this is about losing face. They try and wrap it up in some intellectual, philosophical justification, but it's not. It's about, I will lose face with my neighbors in my community if you come out in that way, or if you don't do what we say you should do. And that's really the basic thing we're talking about here. So I think we've tried to identify victims, and that's a key point, a key way of you getting into identifying what you need to do in relation to those victims. Can I give you a few cases? Because I think that really reflects upon what you might be dealing with. A lot of people think this is about uneducated people, this is about poor people from low-income households, this is what they do. And I dealt with a case a few years back where she was from a family very wealthy. They had a significant number of properties in West London, and she went to university, she had a massive education. She then decided she wanted to marry somebody of her own choice, of the same faith, so it wasn't, you wouldn't imagine there would be a problem here, but in fact there was a problem. And her mother took her at 10 a.m. on that Saturday morning to her boyfriend and said to her boyfriend, would you please wash your hands of her, or else I don't know what's going to happen. And the boyfriend said, well, I love her, I want to marry her. And midday, 2 hours later, she was stabbed 18 times in the presence of 2 infant nieces who were splattered with her blood. 2 hours it took from wash your hands of her, please let her go, to her death. Now, from my perspective, it was very easy to prosecute the 16-year-old boy who carried out the stabbing. Now, why do you think they used the youngest member of the family to carry out the stabbing? Yeah? You worked that out for yourself. But it was obvious to me that there were others involved. And so this is why I say it's different to domestic violence, because what we had to do in that particular scenario was to use organized crime techniques. So listening devices, covert, intercept, you name it, all that sort of stuff to break that wall of silence, to build a case against the other members of the family who were implicated in her crime. They were all brought to justice, save for one who was taken by God before I could take him. Yeah? The point I make is you've got to look to the network, the wider network. And it won't just be about that. We have a scenario where 1 in 9 of our honor killings in the United Kingdom are carried out by hitmen. And in the 10 years I've been looking at these cases, not one hitman has taken any money for this. They do it for kudos, for esteem, for a sense of I'm doing something for the community or for that family. I'm really important now. I've killed somebody to save the community's face. Absolute rubbish, but that's the reality of their belief. And so you've got to recognize that hitmen will come and do their job, even if the family have an alibi. There was one case I dealt with, a Sikh girl called Geeta Aulek. Her crime was that she wanted a divorce. And her husband decided that, well, he couldn't cope with that. So what he decided to do was there was a young Indian boy who'd come over as a student from India, obviously, and he'd never been to study. He was one of these pretend immigration cases. And so he was easily malleable, and he was then tasked with carrying out the act. He appears at where this young lady is about to pick up her 2 children from the childminder, and on the way there she is slaughtered by this man with a machete, so much so that she loses her hand, which is cut off during the attempt to save herself. Now, again, easy for me to prosecute, as I did, the driver of the car, the 17-year-old boy that did the act, but what about husband? Now, husband was in a public house, a pub, at that exact moment, bizarrely a pub that had CCTV, so he was doing this most of the time. It's me, I'm here, I couldn't be carrying out this crime, Unfortunately for him, we've got other means by which we can break that down. Technology, you've got mobile phone technology, cell phone technology, you've got witnesses that you can put into witness protection. All the organized crime stuff that you NYPD officers, FBI officers will do came into play. We were able to bring him down too. And that's what you need to do. You can't simply allow 1 or 2 individuals to take the rap for the whole network that are involved in this type of scenario. And I think the classic example, really, of network is probably the most celebrated, if that's the right word, no, not celebrated, the most horrific, I think, in my view, crime that we've had to deal with in recent years, and that was the murder of Bernaz Mahmod. Do you know about Bernaz Mahmod? Now, Bernaz was 16 when she went into a forced marriage, and she came out at the age of 18, battered and bruised, but nonetheless she survived that. And she was at home. And she was seen outside of a metro station in London kissing her boyfriend. Now, some busybody, not a member of her family, some member of the Kurdish community, decided that he didn't like what he saw and decided that he would go back to see her uncle and her father. He went back to see her uncle and father that evening. And then there was a family council organized where 8 men, including uncle and father and various other members of the community, sat around a table, probably not unlike this one, and decided that Bernaz must die. That was her crime. Her crime, kissing some boyfriend, she must die, was the response. She was then plucked off the street of London the next morning. She was raped by one of her murderers. She was strangled. She was buried in a suitcase 100 miles away. Now, from our perspective, again, we built a very strong case against 3 men, including uncle and father, who were prosecuted and convicted. But there were 8, so we've not finished. 2 of the men went back to Iraq, where they came from, and the information was that they were celebrating in their villages what they had done. So this was post-Saddam, just post-Saddam, so that we arranged for extradition of those 2 men. The first people we've ever extradited from Iraq were the 2 of those people who killed Bernaz. We got them back, and they were successfully convicted. Now it stands at 5. I'm not finished yet. My point is, if you don't go for the whole network, if you don't go for everybody involved, then they think they have got away with it, and they think it's time to move on to some other victim. And when Bernaz's trial was taking place, the first trial was taking place of her killers, women's groups were telling us that people were coming into their groups and saying, I've been told by my family that I'll be the next Bernaz. See, they were using her brutal murder to somehow discipline their own family members. And you'll be pleased to learn that the good news, of course, is we've now convicted 5. The good news is that so much changed on the back of that case. Now, the bad news is, why did it need to change? There's a documentary coming out very shortly called Bernaz, A Love Story, which is a documentary based on her life, using her police interviews, using all sorts of witness interviews. Just been premiered at the London Film Festival. It's coming here very shortly, and you'll see me in it. But that's not the reason why I'm talking about it. The point I'm making is, in that particular documentary, you'll hear what she did with the police. On 4 occasions, she told the police she was going to be killed. On one occasion, she presented the police officer with a list of 5 people that would kill her. On another occasion, she managed to escape from her home, having been plied with alcohol. Now, a good Muslim girl didn't drink, never drank. She'd been plied with alcohol. To what end, do you think? She managed to escape by smashing a window. She goes off, approaches the first police officer she sees. That police officer threatens to arrest her for being hysterical. Blooded hand, drunk. Do you get my point? The opportunities for intervention were not taken. Next thing we know, she's dead. So Bernaz's case meant a massive sea change. I don't want you to have to go through cases like this, one after another. Chris will tell you about the 2 or 3 he's dealt with. I don't want you to have to go through case by case. Learn from us, time to make a change. First up, police need to have minimum standards, across the board, consistent. You don't need a better service in New York than you have in Minneapolis or Los Angeles. It should be the same service. And so what the police did was, maybe it's easy in England and Wales, but we actually ensured that there was a national guidelines which all police forces had to comply with. And then train them in the job. And this is where the NGOs come in. They know what they're talking about. Invite them to do the training. When you've got them trained up, then you need specialist police officers. It's not something that we can expect generalists to do. You've got to have specialisms in this, and that be witness care, victim care, understanding community pressures, intelligence, that kind of stuff. Build a team around the people that are going to do this kind of job on a sort of, not even permanent basis, but at least the specialist basis. Then you need specialist prosecutors, and I've got specialist prosecutors now up and down the country. We've done training around the world, actually, to ensure that there are specialist prosecutors in different countries. But it's important for us to ensure that we provide the right level of service. And then, of course, we had legislation, and I'm really pleased that we did what we did. The Forced Marriage Act is now in place. Have you heard of it? Now, it's not rocket science, as we love to say, because all it is we rebadged everything, we put it in one place. Everything around restraining orders, molestation orders, injunctions, all in one place, all available, and then we spent 6 months telling everybody about it, through roadshows up and down the country to make sure everybody knew about this, and we've done it. In the 3 years it's been in place, we've had nearly 500 people take advantage of these prevention orders that prevent them from being harmed. Go to court, prevent them from being harmed. More than 500. Now, of them, the oldest victim of a forced marriage was 55, just in case you again, have misconceptions about what we're talking about. The youngest was 5. So there you go. I mean, that's the usefulness of having that tool available. But the other thing under the Forced Marriage Act is it has minimum guidelines. There are minimum guidelines, statutory force, for every government agency, every statutory agency. So those of you in social services or child protective services, whatever it is, health professionals, educationalists, all of them have minimum guidelines in that legislation which will enable you to comply. Now, I've had many conversations with people, educationalists, who said to me, we're nearly there, Nazir, we've got there. I said, no, these are minimums. These are not about your aspiration or your ambition. This is where you need to be today. And this is about ensuring that victims can get the right level of service wherever you go. So when a young lady goes to her teacher, for example, or to a health professional and says, look, I'm at risk or I've suffered harm, that person, if they don't know the answer, they can signpost. They can say, where do you want to go with that information? Where they take them. I've told you it can take 2 hours from disclosure to death. So if it can take 2 hours, you've got to respond in speed. And you can signpost people. You can make sure that they are given the right level of advice as soon as possible, which is why I am absolutely determined to assist you and support you in your hotline. I mean, the fact that AHA are that close to a hotline, working with the State Department and others, is absolutely key. And it doesn't require a great deal of sophistication, but people need to be able to pick up a number and pick up a line and be able to ring that person, and that person can provide them with the right level of support right away. Because I've learned from, again, experience, when very often, if these young girls have been brought up in a family where they've never been out, for example, the first time that they feel able to do so, they're running on the running effect, they'll go to the first big building they can see in the hope that this person will be able to provide them with the support and assistance. It could be the town hall, it could be the mayor's office, it could be a hospital, wherever it is. If that person doesn't know what to do with the information they've been given, well, I'm afraid you've failed her. And so it's absolutely essential we have these minimum standards across the board in every agency. Again, nothing sophisticated, it's all about good practice being put in one place, but it's about ensuring that people are held to account on that. That wasn't enough for us. We've got guidance for all our prosecutors. I absolutely admire the guidance that AHA have produced, the training pack that you have in your packs. Really key to have that kind of level of information available and that kind of learning available for people that they can use in their day-to-day lives. And I think it's really important that you use that. You don't invent your own. I'm sure it's copyrighted. Come to AHA, and I'm sure they'll, for a small fee, they'll let you adopt it in some way, shape, or form. But the important thing is that we all work from the same sheet. We all have the same information at our disposal, and we use it in the same way. And I think that the other element really is about what we can do then. Because people were telling the government and people were telling me, that's not enough, Nazir. We're doing fantastic work. We need to criminalize this altogether. Now, a lot of people said, a lot of NGOs said, it's 50-50. They're saying, actually, this will drive it further underground. If people think that they will people will criminalize their parents, they don't want their mums and dads to go to jail. What they do want is to be free and rescued. But the government decided just over a few months ago, based on a consultation, that the time has come to criminalize it. And they were persuaded by two things. One is, if it is underground, well, it's underground. So the further underground doesn't make any difference, does it, really? So let's deal with that aspect. They dealt with that aspect. The second thing is about what you can do in that dynamic between child and parents. A child can go into a parent now and say, Mum, Dad, whatever you're doing to me is morally wrong. Whatever you're doing for me is indefensibly wrong. It's against our religion. It's against my culture. All that stuff. They can say that, but that doesn't have the force of law that a criminal law has. They said that parents would actually be more likely to listen, one would imagine, if a child says to them or somebody tells them, actually, you can go to jail for this. This is now a crime. And that messaging, I think, works. And you will see over the next few months there'll be a substantial media campaign and learning and training as we criminalize forced marriage in the United Kingdom for the first time next year. But we're doing it over 12 months because we need to train people. We need to make sure that people know what's going on. Police officers and others know what to look for in those particular situations. So I think we need to rest assured that is another tool. It's not the only tool. I've said to you already, we've got civil tools, we've got learning, we've got guidelines, we've got specialists, we've got NGO, multi-agency work. Multi-agency work I haven't even touched on really, actually. When a victim comes to, comes to AHA, wouldn't it make sense that you could then immediately set up a little meeting of police, prosecutor, judge, social services, where you actually sit down and risk assess this particular person? And are able to say, well, actually, high risk, we need to do this, this, and this. Medium risk, we need to do this, this, and this. I think that multi-agency risk, which you invented, actually, for domestic violence, that, to my mind, is a key piece of work around of this issue, having that multi-agency response immediately available for that particular victim. Now, regrettably, there have been many, many murders, and I've dealt with a number of cases where we never found the body. I mentioned Shafilia's case, where we found her body 5 months after she died. In Tülay Goran's case, she was a Turkish girl. She disappeared 10 years ago at the age of 15. We never found her body, but it took us 10 years to break down that wall of silence and eventually get Mum, actually, to say what had happened and bring a successful prosecution against Dad. Never found her body. Sergio Atwell was exported to India, ostensibly for a family wedding, never ever seen again. And we know that she was murdered as well. So we were able to bring successful prosecutions against her family as well. I don't know how many unmarked graves there are. Generally, when a child goes missing, who reports that child going missing? Family. But if the family are responsible for their child going missing, they're not really going to be going down to NYPD and saying, my child's gone missing. This is where neighborliness comes in. This is where community intelligence comes in. This is why schools have an important role to play. Where is this child? How, do we know where she's gone? Do we know from social services or health professionals if there's a history for this child? To my mind, we need that intelligence in real time to be able to protect these people before they are harmed. But if they are harmed, we can build very strong cases, and we need to build strong cases against these individuals. And the international element shouldn't be underestimated, forgive me, because we have, the State Department I know have, very strong ties in lots of jurisdictions. I've got a lovely guy in Pakistan called Albert, and I've mentioned him already. The point is that I know if we need somebody to be rescued, and we do have a forced marriage unit based in our government, based in our Home Office and forced Foreign Office, State Department in effect, and that is the nearest thing to James Bond that we have. They fly into whichever part of the world it is, working with the jurisdiction. It's not a flying in and flying out business. They fly in and they work with the jurisdiction to rescue that particular individual. And they do. 400 a year are rescued from other countries by the forced marriage unit. And many of them don't need that kind of rescue. What they need is somebody like Albert or somebody else for that matter to work out locally where she is and then bring her home. As we think we heard earlier on. You need that kind of level of international cooperation. You will get it. Bizarrely, this is the thing about why it happens, because a lot of people who believe this is something they should do, but for whatever reason, base it on a distorted view of what their country was like. Back in 1962, or 61, when my parents came from Pakistan, they assumed this is the way things were. That part of Pakistan now is as modern, I was going to say as modern as New York, but it isn't. But you know what I mean? It's metropolitan. There is a real sense of there's socializing, there's nightclubs, that kind of stuff. It's all underground, I guess. But the point is, it's moved on. Yet the parents from that time still think the way that they were brought into this country. They're stuck in a little bit of a time warp, and they assume that it's still the way it is. This is why you will get support and assistance from the other jurisdictions if you ask for it. But you've got to have the networks to enable you to do that. I've had Amanda ring me up. Do you know somebody in Saudi? Yeah. Do you know somebody in... thankfully, we're very fortunate we have those contacts and links, but you can build them up yourselves. We shouldn't be precious about our networks and our links. Ultimately, we want the same thing, the safety of the individual concerned. And so don't think that way. I'm not going to give my business card out, so don't ring me, please. But my point is that build your networks, ensure that you're able to save people and save people's lives. Now, I can talk about cases of the cows come home. I've dealt with probably about 30 honor-based violence homicides in the last 7 or 8 years. That is still only a tip. I've dealt with several other types of crime. As you know, I prosecute everything, so it's not just about those types of cases. But I'm constantly on the lookout for the answer. And you ask the question, what's the answer? The answer is education and awareness. The answer is education with victims, so they know what they're looking for. They know what's happening to them. Very often they don't know what's happening to them. Now, we started, in effect, training in kindergarten, in what we call primary school, which I don't know what that is for you. The first school they go to, then in high school. If you wait until they're 18 or 20 to talk to them about their rights, it is too late. You're set in your ways. You get to them as early as possible to explain that genders are the same, men and women have the same rights. All of that as early as possible, then you have an opportunity and a chance to save their lives. If you wait, it's too late. I talked to a 20-odd-year-old man who I thought this is a generational thing. I thought it would die out with a generation. Nah. These young men, for whatever reason, still think this way. He said to me, Nazir, don't you understand? He said, man is a piece of gold. Woman is a piece of silk. If you drop a piece of gold in mud, you can wipe it clean. But if you drop a piece of silk in mud, it's stained forever. That is his attitude to women. Now, you can talk about dry cleaning till the cows come home. The point is, he thinks that men can be cleansed in some way, if they need to be. Women, they're done forever, and you can't clean them as if you need to, But that's his view. And that's a generational thing. That's why it's important that you educate as early as possible, and education can be done in so many ways. We have some fantastic little productions, theatre productions that go around schools in England. Again, they're off the shelf. You don't need to buy your own or make your own. Bring them over, deliver them in your schools, and the little actors deliver them about these kinds of scenarios, and they have a conversation with the children and the young people about what it means for them, etc., etc. Again, something you can do about raising awareness, and you'll be up against the community or members of the community who tell you don't do it, and I'll tell you, do it. Don't listen to anybody that talks about multicultural sensitivity or political correctness in this respect, because your first duty is to the victim. Your first duty is the woman at risk, not to her community member, family member, temple leader, whatever it may be. Your first duty is to her. And don't even think about multicultural sensitivity when it comes to the issues of victims and victims' rights. So, I've had this said to me, Nazir, I can't go in there on my own. And I said, I will hold your hand, Chief Police Officer. If it needs to be, because you feel uncomfortable in that environment, get them in there. And you will come across many people who will say, they'll pay lip service. You know the phrase, lip service? They'll pretend to listen. Challenge them. Don't accept what they say. There are many occasions when I've gone to places where they will say, Nazir, we agree with everything you say. And then, of course, 6 months later, something terrible happens. I never accept that. I make sure that we constantly keep that dialogue going and identify champions within the community. The answer lies in the community and the communities. The enforcement response is one response. The education response is another. But working with communities is the key. And you will find champions in those communities. You just need to encourage them to come out and recognize them and make sure that they are able to act, feel comfortable about acting in a particular situation or a scenario. I've given evidence to Parliament on a number of occasions, my Parliament, which is your Congress, on many occasions on this subject and many others. And the very last time I spoke, I talked to them about this production of Oliver that was going around various schools. Now, you know what happens in Oliver to Nancy? Do you know Oliver? Oliver Twist? Nancy is killed by Bill Sykes in a controlling situation. But in this production that went around various schools, that never happened. It all ended singing and dancing. Because the school and the governors decided we did not want to expose our children to this kind of thing. Yet we know that 1 in 4 children are exposed to it at home anyway, whether it's domestic abuse or violent abuse or whatever it may be. So why are we fooling ourselves in thinking that we can wrap our children up with cotton wool and we don't do this? We should be gladiators in that environment, going into those schools, those environments, those communities, using our leverage, losing our champions to educate and to challenge where necessary and to name and shame where necessary. I've had to do that as well, where people have simply given me given me one story and they end up doing something different. You've got to make sure that you do that and feel comfortable and be supported. So when you do it, somebody else supports you in doing it. You're not on your own. I've had that happen to me, and I felt really, really lonely. You don't want to be on your own. With your networks, you're able then to work together to make sure that individual is supported. Now, what are we challenged with? How long have I gone? 15 minutes. What are we challenged with? We're also challenged with the generation we have. We now have, don't we, the iPod generation. The iPod generation sticks something in their ears, and the only thing they listen to is what they choose to listen to themselves. Yeah? And we have the sat-nav generation, where it has to guide you everywhere you go, Now, so what do we do here? These people somehow have given up their independent thought, seemingly. You've got to find a means by which you can attract them too. And part of our response is to use the media. I've mentioned Bernaz's case where they were using the horrible killing to frighten off other women. We were using the media the exact opposite. When we brought people to justice, we went to town, Chris, we did. We went to town on the media, making sure that, I was there all the time talking about it, saying, we're going after every single one of them and we will bring them all to justice. That's the kind of thing you need to do in order to make sure that people don't feel they're able to get away with it. And as I said to you, even when children, it takes 10 years or 20 years, you make sure you bring someone to justice for that. And that, to my mind, is the way you deal with those people who somehow think they can get away with this kind of thing. So, that's the way to get around the iPod generation and the sat-nav generation. Use whatever means you have. I'm advisor, in the United Kingdom, I advise Law and Order, which is a spin-off of your television series, Law and Order UK. And in that scenario, we've already had a plot line based around honour issues. I also advise the equivalent of one of our big soaps. I don't know what your equivalent is. Again, and we're about to have a forced marriage storyline through that. So we're mainstreaming it. You do it almost surreptitiously, secretly, without them even knowing you're doing it, but you're raising awareness. And as I said to you, those people, for example, who are never allowed out of their houses, you've got to get to them. So how do you get to them? You get to them through mainstream media. You get to them through appearing on David Letterman or something. You get to them through whatever means that you can. Any media you can do. One of the things we've suggested, and maybe something the State Department won't take on, is that when for example, flights are coming from certain parts of the country world where we anticipate this happens more than others, you know that little TV screen you have in front of you where you're stuck watching it for 8 hours of your journey? Why can't you stick a little advert up on there, about what services are available in New York, for example, what number you can ring, wherever it may be, if you are in danger. Because we've known people who come in. Sabia Rani was a young woman who came for an arranged marriage. Now, she consented, if that's the right word, to that marriage. She arrived in the United Kingdom 4 years ago. For 5 months, she was with her husband, and every single day she was battered by her husband, to the point where in April the following month, or 5 months after she'd arrived, she was dead. And the coroner thought that she'd been in a road accident. That's how bad it was. She couldn't speak the language. She had no idea what services were available. She did not know that there were people there. She didn't know it was wrong, what was happening to her. But the point is that this is the kind of victim we're dealing with very often. And so you've got to find the means to get to them the information, and whether it's through that little TV screen, or whether it's through mainstream media, whether it's through minority media, whether it's through simply leafleting or wider awareness raising, you've got to do whatever it takes to get that message out, to make sure that those people are safe. And one of the things I was going to say to you right at the outset is that I wanted to cheer you up, because you've saved lives, and you will save lives every day in the things that you do. You just need to make sure that you save lives consistently. That because she comes to you rather than you, she's got more chance of life. Well, that can't be right. Wherever she goes, you've got to be able to give her the right level of support and assistance. Now, as I said to you, education is the key. If you don't educate, I'm afraid you're going to lead people down the sunny route where we will have this for decades and decades and decades. When I did that conference 10 years ago, the first in England, people were ringing me up from Italy saying, Nazir, we invented this in Italy, this issue of honour. The Coda Omerta, or whatever it is, the mafiosa code, the code of silence. I said, yeah, right, okay. And the French were telling me, oh, Nazir, we had this in France. Yeah, I can't do a French accent for toffee, but we used to duel. Remember dueling on the fields at dawn? I said, yeah, you dueled, but you had a gun each. It's not the same thing. What we have is a vulnerable, extremely vulnerable young woman, invariably, who is at risk. And you need to do something about it. So yes, this has gone on for centuries and centuries. There's no reason why it needs to go on. I've said to you that first contact is the most important contact. Whoever speaks to that person first needs to be able to help or signpost, and needs to be able to do so in real time. I've said to you that this is about self-respect. The families think that this is the way to get self-respect, which is why you need to educate them that this is the most disrespectful thing you can do. You dishonor your family by damaging your children. You dishonor your family by denying them an education and giving them basic human rights. This is an issue of human rights. And if you don't take it that way, you will let people starve and die every single day of the week. I ran into a woman, I'll finish with this. I ran into a woman a few months ago, and she showed me, I noticed that she had her wedding ring on this finger. And I said to her, why do you have your wedding ring on this finger? And she said, the wrong finger. She said, because they made me marry the wrong man. That was her small token of rebellion. That's all she could do because she had no voice. That's because we are her voice. And if we're nothing to her, well, rest assured there'll be others that need her and need our voice for her. The only difference, one of the things, obviously your English is very different to our English. I noticed that, honour, of course, is spelled differently. You have H-O-N-O-R, we have H-O-N-O-U-R. The only difference, therefore, between us and you is the letter U. And I wanted to make sure that you knew how important you were. That's a terrible little phrase, isn't it? You knew how important you were in the work that you do. If you don't do this, then you need to recognize that there will be victims on your streets tonight. And I think the saddest thing, quite frankly, is that all of this is avoidable. Now, you won't get the most extreme example like Bernaz, where she actually comes to you and gives you a list of the people that are going to kill her. But you will get examples where early intervention was necessary, or was possible, if it was necessary. And I think we've got to make sure that we have these people at our fingertips, skilled up to do the job, to save lives. Otherwise, there will be more Shafilias, there'll be more Bernazes, there'll be more, there will be a long list of victims catalogued on these walls or anywhere else. I don't want that, you don't want that, let's stop it. Thank you. I understand. I've got a few minutes for questions, and yeah, lady there, lady there.
Thank you very much. You say we are where you were 10 years ago. What was the key at the beginning? Because in my experience, most Americans either are not aware that forced marriage exists in this country, honor killings, maybe they have a marginal awareness. But what was the key to start the recognition process?
Okay. It required information. I mean, when I organized that conference, bizarrely, I knew very little about the subject. You imagine that with my background, my heritage, I should know all about this, but I'm a man. That's why I didn't. So it was women's groups that were educating me. They were saying, Nazir, there are very few men, for example, that talk about this subject. Chris, is a credit to you. The idea that you need men to speak out in support of women. Women's groups themselves will be targeted when they talk about these subjects or when they provide services for victims. I've had many, many cases where they themselves are suffering because of the nature of their work. So you need male leadership. You need to ensure that intelligence information is available to you. But ultimately, you need to be persistent. One of the things we did, almost calculated actually, is we had a comm strategy that lasted 5 years, communication strategy. We will do this. When people stop talking about it, you know what the media's like. They move on to the next subject. I didn't want that to happen. So we would say something today, and then 2 months later we'd provide some new information based on surveying, for example. So we keep it in the public eye. We identify more and more champions, I said to you earlier on. So you just need to be persistent, quite frankly, but really do need leadership. And of course, you need to support victims groups all the time.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about young girls who are sold into marriage or forced marriage, who then are considered dual nation. And I'm specifically referring to a film that I'm producing where 2 British girls were sold into Yemen marriage, and they notified the embassy, but the embassy couldn't do anything because they were dual nation. Is there any programs now in place to help individuals in that sort of situation?
Absolutely. I'd see that as forced marriage. That's forced marriage. That's slavery, and child exploitation. We don't draw the line. Bizarrely, forgive me, I didn't even touch on female genital mutilation. We have a major problem in the United Kingdom. We have probably 19,000 cases a year, no prosecutions. And that's largely because they happen abroad, largely because of the code of silence, etc., etc., etc. We see all of these linked, and you can't deal with just the one thing or the things I've talked about without the things that you've talked about. And so we need a strategy that deals with all those things. And you have a very good violence against women strategy more generally, don't you? I mean, I know you do. So I think it's about whatever you've learned from around honor-based violence or around forced marriage being applied to the scenario that you dealt with. We also have a problem with early marriage. I don't think I touched on early marriage. The fact that you're getting married at 12 and 13 is still an issue for us. It's against the law in our country. I'm sure it's against the law here as well. And so we need to be able to have tools available to tackle that too. I don't want to belittle it. Somebody actually said to me, the problem here is that men think they can control everything. And men can do what they want. My message to anybody working anywhere in this field is that I will find you a champion in any part of the world whom you can talk to. So that scenario where she goes off to a different country, wherever it may be, we can find somebody there to bring her back or to provide her with protection where she is.
Thank you. Men rule the world.
Yep.
So with that being said, for the work that you do in the UK, What are the statistics for male honor killings with perceived or known homosexual cases?
In relation to male honor killings, we don't have we have. The data we have is related to forced marriages. We have something like between 10 and 15% of forced marriages in the United Kingdom involve a male person. We also did a study, a specific study, just based on in 1 month, back in 2007, we looked at everything that we dealt with. And that snapshot told us that there were a sizable number of male victims of serious violence. But when you actually explored what they were, every single male victim revolved around the sexual behavior of a woman. He was collateral damage almost. I don't want to kill my own daughter or harm my own daughter. I'll get you. You know, I'll get this man, this man, this man. So the point is, yes, there are male victims, but never lose sight of the fact that it always revolves around the woman's behavior or perceived sexual behavior.
Homosexual activity,
Yeah.
why would it be the woman's fault?
Well,
Who would he point that to?
Yeah, we haven't got the sophisticated data to be able to say how many of them are related to their sexuality. We have obviously cases where that's the case, and you can imagine we're now at the sort of level of detail where people are even more reluctant to come forward and seek support and assistance. You know, there's something about men who somehow they feel, you know, they can't talk about the fact that they've been forced into marriage. You know, I'm a man. I should, you know, surely I couldn't be forced into marriage. You know, I've been married 3 times, right? And I was never forced into marriage. But the point I'm making is that men somehow come up against this issue of self-esteem, confidence before being able to disclose. And I think the answer is networks. So LGBT networks that we have across the country in the United Kingdom, they will collect that kind of data and that kind of information and give us also real-life cases. But literally, we're talking about small numbers just because of the how hidden the problem is.
I just wanted to add, Nazir, that was just absolutely fantastic. But I just wanted to add the point on the men. In the Netherlands, there are all kinds of, say, Muslim homosexuals or Moroccan homosexuals, or they organize themselves around religion or around ethnicity, and it's almost always about the same thing. What we see happen to gay men in those communities is that they're disowned, that they lose their reputation, and because they're embedded in the male community and they're more sophisticated than girls, they know when they're in danger, and very often they leave. And very often it's easier to help guys than girls, because guys don't call home and say, I've changed my ways, I'm going to come back. So the rate of homicide is much smaller, but the violence and the oppression is just as bad.
I mean, forgive me, there's also a big issue, because they'll often cover it up. They will get married to somebody because they will cover that up. But then you're creating more victims, aren't you? Their partner, their new female partner, is a victim. The children of the family are victims. The wider communities are victims. So, you know, it's much more sophisticated than I've tried to be able to explain.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how do you address, the issue of forced marriage and honor killings without necessarily reinforcing cultural stereotype? Because if the idea is to really work with the community itself to change the cultural mindset, I would feel that my feeling is that by kind of bringing to light the issue of forced marriage, you might actually just be reinforcing cultural stereotypes.
I mean, there is a danger about that, but it's about where you place this, and we don't place it in an issue of women's rights. We place it in human rights. This is human rights and an entitlement. We all have, and once you do that, I think you get around that issue, or begin to get around that issue. You'll undoubtedly you'll get people who don't accept what I say or what you say. But the reality is, if you put it in the human rights agenda, we all have the same rights. We have a right to marry who you marry, when you marry, if you marry, a right to get out of a marriage. You don't only part to have a right to an education. These are basic human rights that everybody allegedly swears by. So from my perspective, that's where you need to place it. Then you will come up against it's not our problem. It's a denial. I think the next issue you get is denial. It doesn't. We accept that, but it doesn't really happen in our communities. Then you get some high-profile examples which put that to bed, and then of course you hopefully will get some leaders within those communities who begin to accept, yes, it is a problem, and yes, we need to do something about it, and then they'll take responsibility for it. We need to champion those champions. I go back to what a point I made about loneliness. I may not have had death threats, but I've been seriously lonely at times, talking about this subject, speaking about this subject, trying to get engaged with people. I've had people tell me, "Oh, we can't legislate because it costs." Well, what's the cost of killing somebody? I don't know what it's like here, for example, but one murder investigation and prosecution in the United Kingdom costs us $1.5 million. I don't know what the cost is here. Now, why don't you give me that $1.5 million and actually do something at Tahiri or Aha, which actually saves that life, 10 lives, instead of 10 murderers. There's a strong business case for this, but you, as I said to you, place it in your human rights agenda, talk about it as a human right all the time, consistently, and then I think you get away from the cultural, religious aspects that people want to bring to it. I think we're done. Thank you very much indeed.